Welcome to a Philosophy of Action. Today I want to finish off the action economy discussion with a Keynesian critique, because the problem is actually very simple. Keynesianism treats money like it can store reality. It assumes the state can tax society in the good years, save that money, and then spend it in the bad years to stabilize the economy. But sadly, money is not reality. Money isn't food, housing, nurses, buildings, future children, or human action itself. Money is simply a claim to that human action. And if the human action doesn't exist, the money is just a number pretending to be power. The basic Keynesian model sounds reasonable. In good years, when the economy grows, the state taxes more and saves more. Then, in bad years, when the economy crashes, the state spends the money back into the economy through grants, subsidies, tax cuts, public works, and government programs. So, if the economy grows at 4%, maybe the state takes 2%, then the growth falls to zero. Of course, it depends on how much money is saved, but you try to push it back up to 2. The graph looks smoother, the GDP stays higher, and the technocrats clap. But from an action economy perspective, this model already misunderstands what's being stored. The state can store money, yes, but it cannot store labor. If the state taxes a man today, it does not capture his labor hours and place them in a vault. Those hours happened in the present, or they did not happen at all. You cannot take a worker's labor in 2026 and release it in 2036. 10 years later, that worker might have retired, become sick, dead, gone from the country, or working in a completely different industry. The machines may be obsolete, the skills may be useless, the demographic structure may have changed, the society underneath, the money may not even be the same society anymore. So when the state says we've saved money for the future, what's really being saved is not labor. You saved the claim on labor. A claim on whoever still exists later. A claim on whatever worker, skill, energy, trust, institutions, and productive capacity still survive. That is the first lie. A budget surplus is not stored labor. It is a stored claim on future individuals and their action. And if there are fewer future people, fewer builders, fewer nurses, fewer children, and less trust, less energy, less productive capacity, then that claim becomes far weaker. The fund may still exist, the number may still exist, but the reality underneath it has changed. This is why countercyclical economics without demographics is insanity. You cannot hedge a dying society with money. You cannot save your way out of demographic collapse. You cannot tax labor now and magically summon workers later. But it gets worse, because Keynesianism also misunderstands many crashes. A crash is not always just not enough spending. Sometimes a crash is a reality check. Sometimes people have overinvested in a sector. They have built too much, borrowed too much, promised too much, trained too many people, created too many firms, and organized too much human action around demand that was never real enough to sustain it. That is what a bubble is. A bubble is not just prices going up. A bubble is human action being dragged into a false world by monetary signals. The money signal says, this is profitable. The credit signal says, expand this. The investors say, everyone wants this. The market says this is the future. So people act, they build, they borrow, they hire, they speculate, they train, and reorganize their lives around that signal. Then reality hits. Tulips, trains, housing, tech bubbles. Whatever form it takes, the pattern is the same. Claims outrun reality. Money outruns action. Expectation outruns capacity. Then the crash comes. And what does the Keynesian state do? It runs in with money and tries to keep the corpse moving. It props up failed firms, it protects broken sectors, it keeps workers locked inside action patterns that should be dying. A crash may be reality trying to correct misdirected human action. Keynesian stimulus can become the state delaying that correction or preventing it entirely. That's not healing, that is economic necromancy. You are not reviving a healthy economy, you are pumping blood into a dead limb and calling it stability. And GDP may even look better, because GDP loves transaction. Pay people to dig holes, fill them back in, and GDP rises. Subsidize useless production and GDP can rise. Bail out zombie firms, GDP can rise. Move money around through government programs and GDP rises. The number moves, the chart looks alive, but underneath human action may still be going to the wrong places. That is the second lie. Keynesianism confuses money moving with reality improving. Then comes the third problem, power. In the good years, the state taxes. It takes part of the produce of your labor productivity and ability to act. Then the bad years, when businesses are weak, workers are desperate, assets are cheaper, and the industries are begging for survival. The state comes back with money it took earlier and uses it to buy influence. It subsidizes this sector, rescues that firm, funds this project, creates that grant, protects this industry, attaches conditions, creates dependency. And everyone calls it stabilization. No, it is power accumulation. It is the state using the boom-bust cycle to expand control over the action economy. In a crash, businesses are weaker, labor is cheap, sectors are desperate, people accept conditions they would never accept in normal times. So the state steps in as a savior. But the savior becomes the manager, the gatekeeper, and the funder, the buyer of last resort, and the rule-maker of last resort. Every crisis tightens that relationship. Businesses become dependent on the state. Industry becomes dependent on subsidy. Banks become dependent on rescue. Energy becomes dependent on policy. Agriculture becomes dependent on compensation, and infrastructure becomes dependent on state contracts. This is especially obvious in Europe, where more and more economy seems tied to state aid, green transition funding, crisis support, public guarantees, regulatory favors, and industrial policy. Not socialism in the old-fashioned sense, something uglier. A fake market economy, where private firms still exist, but increasingly survive through state connection. A subsidy economy, a zombie economy, and a bureaucratic patronage system. A system where the state does not openly own everything, but increasingly decides what gets to live and what dies. Now, this does not mean anti-cyclical policy is impossible. It simply means that we have been thinking about it the wrong way. Bad anti-cyclical policy stores money. Good anti-cyclical policy stores reality. If society has surplus wealth, surplus labor, surplus energy, or more important, surplus productive ability and action in the good years, then do not just turn that into financial claims by just storing tax money and pretend you save the future. Use that tax money. Use the labor while it exists. Build housing, build energy systems, build water system, build rail, build ports, build food reserves, build the industrial capacity, train specialists, engineers, builders, and soldiers. Raise children, strengthen families, create reserves of medicine, tool, fuel, spare parts, and basic goods. That's how you store labor. You do not store labor by turning it into money. You store labor by turning it into durable reality. A bridge is stored labor. A trained worker is stored labor. A house is stored labor. A power plant, food reserves, functioning family structures, a child, and strong institutions are all stored coordinating human action mechanisms. That is real savings, not numbers in accounting, not a budget surplus, not a future claim on a society that may no longer exist. The Keynesian model stores claims and spends them when society is weak. The action economy model uses strength while society has it, so society is less weak later. That also reduces state capture, because the state can't simply sit on a pile of money and wait for a crash to buy influence over desperate sectors. Instead, it has to build the productive base that makes the crash less destructive in the first place. That is the difference. Keynesianism saves claims for the crisis. An action economy builds capacity against the crisis. Because money is not the economy. Human action is the economy. And once the people, skills, families, trust, and productive capacity are gone, the money is just paper screaming at an empty room.